It is election day +2 here at the National Results Operational Centre at Gallagher Estate in Midrand. My name is Pieter de Tooy. We are live from our little studio here at the National Results Centre. 2 days after the election was held on Wednesday, the results are still trickling through. Of course, News 24, courtesy of Davie Skols, has made some significant projections over the last couple of days. I cannot get enough of this. I'm loving every single moment. I never want to leave this space. It's fantastic. Pumi Mkabela, welcome. Davie Skols, welcome again.
Thank you.
Pumi, what's been the highlight for you? What's been the single moment that has stood out for you over the last couple of days? Off the top of your head, quick sticks. What's been a highlight?
Good afternoon, Peter. I think the highlight for me was to see the ANC touching 41 point something percent when over 60% of the votes had been counted.
And Pumi, you are much too serious. That's boring. My highlight was Gwede Mantashe alone in front of the scoreboard and he didn't know what to say. Davie, what's been your single most searing moment that you will take away from this?
Sorry, no, I will also give it quite a nerdy answer.
Guys,
sorry,
guys.
no, I have to, but I'm really passionate about this, right? And I must
it's when
say,
your screen flickered on for the first time.
No, that was no. I will say, just I've done many of these, right?
Yes.
And just being here in the ROC, specifically on election night when the voting station started reporting, it really felt like a real privilege to be here at this moment for the country, and particularly at 1 a.m. or so when those first KZN readies started reporting. You could sort of hear in the ROC random groans here or there from different people, how people were responding to some of the numbers coming out, and it was just unbelievable to be here.
Okay, so we're going to have a serious conversation because clearly you guys don't want to, talk about colour. Mpumi, have we gotten our heads around what has happened over the last 48 hours? Have you gotten your head around the enormity of what's happened? Or are you still trying to come to terms with what happened and what the implications might be?
I think the reality is sinking for a lot of people. Doesn't matter what your views were before the elections, but I think it's the reality of the matter that we are going to see serious political change in the country. It's sinking for a lot of people, and I think it's because, firstly, we have been having polls telling us. It was almost as if they were preparing us psychologically, because what we are seeing here, there is not much big variation with what the polls were saying and what the results are saying at the moment, even though the counting is not done. The second thing that is helping us is that all the pollsters are also doing tracking, so they keep on updating their projections. That also helps psychologically to continuously prepare you for the ultimate outcome. So when it's finally announced, boom, there's no shock because you are being prepared consistently as you watch the results.
Davie, I mean, let's talk about these projections, and I think Pumi's right. It started to condition the public about what's coming. I mean, I was just at the ANC's desk when before we came in, and I'm kind of getting the idea that I don't want to say that they're starting to make peace with what happened, but I think they're starting to see the inevitability of where we're headed. Let's talk about your projections. Let's talk about how it's changed, and also why it's changed.
Can I just say one thing about what you guys just said?
Yes, you can.
Which is that I think a lot of people have been prepared mentally, at least in my conversations, for ANC with 45 to 50. I think a lot of people felt okay, the ANC may lose the election, but it's not going to be that big a deal because they would just be able to get 1 or 2 small little parties and it would be quite easy. That was the expectation of a lot of people, but it's looking like 41 or 40 or 42 at the absolute most at this point, which is a different place to be. So I think that is what a lot of people are kind of trying to work through, and frankly myself as well. I'm trying to figure out what it means. Anyway, that was the question you asked him.
No. Can I stick to that topic, Davie and Mpumi? It is starting to filter through everywhere on the floor. What I also found interesting was in conversation with one of the DA strategists. I mean, they are happy with the result, and we can. That's a whole different discussion. But they're happy with the result, and now they're starting to think about what comes next. And it was interesting for me. This guy telling me that, they also need some time to try and understand about what this means, about what should and could come going forward, and about thinking about maybe there will be some form of an arrangement with the ANC. So there's a lot of psychological work that needs to happen, not only amongst ourselves, but amongst political parties and the public.
Yeah. Look, they did well. Sorry, now we're going on a different tangent there, but they did well.
I thought we were going to have a structured conversation, but let's just freewheel then.
They did well, I think, to have this conversation in a way that suited them before the election, right? So, because they said, okay, let's try to form the MPC to take, to try to take over.
Yes.
Then it became very obvious that wasn't going to work, but they said, like, we tried that, right?
Yeah.
Then they said, okay, we've tried that, it didn't work. Now we're in a situation where the ANC is under 50, and I think then the one train of thought was, okay, the ANC would be 47 or 48, so then there wouldn't be really a difficult discussion. But then what they always said to everyone from the beginning, the DA now, is that the absolute last thing we want is an ANC EFF or ANC MK coalition government, right? And they never then clarified what it means, but the very obvious logical conclusion is if you say that, okay, well, if there's not going to be an ANC EFF or ANC MK government, there's going to be an ANC DA government, right? They never really said that because I don't think they didn't want to say it, but I think people have been starting to be, because that's where we're going. And, but I wonder though, because this expectation was so set for like 45 plus, whether they actually, as you say, are fully ready for it. Have they thought through the implications? How would they do it? How would it be set up? How would they control it? How would they continue holding the ANC to account while governing with the ANC? There's so many complexities.
Mpumi, I mean, yes.
I want to jump in on the DA question. I think the DA is looking comfortable. You say they're almost celebrating and happy and all of that. I think largely because of the relief that they could keep the Western Cape. There was a time during the campaign when the DA was panicking. You remember when John Steenhuisen had made his remarks about all these parties coming to campaign in the Western Cape. Because I think that some of their internal polling was telling them that there's something wrong with some of the areas in the Western Cape that might contribute to your drop. And some projections had actually predicted the DA may go just slightly below 50%, so which means that they were going to have to need a coalition partner. And it seems as if with the number of votes now counted, they are out of the woods. So they will form a government comfortably alone. So having now kept the jewel of the DA, which is the Western Cape, they are now looking at, okay, how did we fare elsewhere? They're looking very good in Gauteng. The early numbers, they were putting them at like 30%, while the ANC was tracking at 33%, which is looking nice if you are seen almost as if you are neck and neck. In the final outcome,
it might be different.
There will be a wider difference between the DA and the ANC. But with the ANC at a loss and the DA in its late 20s or early 30s, it will still be victory for the DA. So I think they are making those type of considerations that overall we have kept our jewel, and then in Gauteng we've made significant inroads, and overall the ANC has dropped. So it makes them comfortable. Then they have space to say, okay, what can we do now with our votes in the National Assembly? Who can we talk to? John Steenhuisen said earlier when he came here that his first priority is, as soon as the numbers are counted, his first priority is the multi-party charter. They're going to call a meeting of the multi-party charter.
Not much left of that.
And say, what do we do now? And I think it's a question of, if he sticks to what he's saying, it's a question of honor, because that's what they told voters. They campaigned on the back of this multi-party charter. Even if they didn't get much collectively, they have to go back and say, okay, guys, we didn't get anything, so now maybe it's free for all. Negotiate with whoever you want to negotiate.
Because you couldn't bring in the votes that you said you...
Because we all couldn't bring the votes that can help us cross the mark. So now they're going to say, everyone for themselves, be free to negotiate with whoever you want to negotiate with.
So Mpumi, how important will, and we need to talk about what comes next, because again, I don't want us to forget about, to forget the enormity of the moment and the massive impact that this will have on our politics, but we need to talk about what comes next. But I want to talk about communication and how important that is going to be. And we've been speaking about people being conditioned and prepared for a new formation, but it's going to be important for the ANC and the DA to communicate to their voters and the public about what they plan and whether they go into an agreement with the DA or the ANC or not. I mean, that's going to be very important as far as the voters are concerned.
100%, Peter. And the part that has to do a lot of that proper communication is the ANC.
Yes.
Because that's the party that needs serious internal leadership. It's only in times of crisis like this that you actually need sober, calm minds. If they don't do that, there will be a lot of blame game that will put the ANC at risk of not being able to form a government in time, and firstly, and secondly, at risk of splitting even further, and thirdly, which is worse, of having some of the leaders perhaps resigning and leaving the ANC leaderless and incapable of doing any negotiation. Look, the ANC may be falling below 50%, but we can't take away the fact that it's still the biggest party in the country. So it still has some leadership responsibility around the future of the country. And that future of the country is dependent on how it negotiates with other parties or how it does its own internal stakeholder negotiations. They have the alliance, they have the Communist Party, they've got COSATU.
Well, exactly. And surely some of those organizations will be implacably opposed against any form of agreement with the DA.
That's why the communication is critical. They have to draw up a script. These are our principles. Can we go and negotiate with parties based on these principles? And then if you meet other parties where the principles match, then it means they can be a political mating.
Yes.
If you like.
Davi, the elections are over. Theoretically, the politicians and the parties don't need the voters immediately. I mean, will voters remember being sold out after the election?
Look, I think we need to be so we need to be quite careful here. There's just 50 levels of complexity. So just a couple of things to say.
50 levels of complexity.
Yeah. So I'm speaking casually. So the first thing is just, in this whole discussion, is what happens internally in the ANC in the next 2 weeks. Okay, so we don't know the answer to that question, or whether it even is a question. But in my mind, it's definitely a question, because that's step one. Because whoever's talking to the ANC, the question is, who are they talking to? Who is the people?
ANC, yes.
Who is the five guys? Right, or gals? Right. That's question one, because it's Cyril Ramaphosa's team right now. Would it be Cyril Ramaphosa's team 5 days from now?
Or Paul Mashatili's team?
Yeah, so that's the first question, and I don't want to create any stress for anyone, but I'm afraid that just is the reality at this point. So question number one, and once that question is settled, then obviously I think there's a sub-question, which is just how stable is the situation in the EFF? I think that they've had a terrible election result. I'm assuming it's relatively stable, but I could just be curious about that, right? But I think MK is probably stable, DA is stable, so then the leadership teams are set, right? And then the question thereafter is, what is the interaction model, right? Because I think we're talking a lot about the DA ANC potential. I think we've spoken on this channel about how that's probably a rational outcome for the country, but it's not set. It could be any of those combinations is the other thing. So let's just find that out. But then just to actually answer your question regarding the voters, I will caution, number one, that I think all of the voters who are looking at this are, I think, intelligent enough to say, as compared to what, right? So I think particularly the DA vote is going to say, I think if you poll DA voters and you say, do you like the idea of the DA going into a coalition with the ANC? An overwhelming majority will say, no, I hate the idea. If you do the exact same poll with the exact same voters and you say, do you like the idea of the DA going into a coalition with the ANC? And if they don't, there's going to be a coalition between the ANC and the EFF, or the ANC and MK. I think the answer is going to be very, very, very different from those same voters. So this idea of being sold out, I think, is a very nuanced and complex topic on the DA side of the discussion. To be frank, I think you're right. On the ANC side of the discussion, convincing the kind of people on the ANC alliance partners, the remaining left wing of the party, that they want to go with the DA, that's going to be a hell of a job.
I mean, how difficult is it going to be, Mpumi, to convince DA supporters that, in order to prevent coalition with these two parties, we have to go into an agreement with the DA? I mean, which is also antithesis to what the DA and its supporters believe in. I mean, they are political enemies. So now you're going to have to get these people under one tent, under one roof.
Yeah, I actually think it would be harder for the ANC to convince its supporters than the other way around.
I agree.
And I think the DA has shown that it's got a core unshakable base, which I don't think that base would ever abandon the DA. The DA's problem has never been about the core base. The DA's problem has always been about, can we grow the party to beyond the core base? So, untroubled by a core base, the DA can enter into negotiations with the ANC, but can the ANC do that type of negotiation?
Exactly.
I don't think it's possible, and if it's
not possible, you mean?
I don't think it's possible for the ANC to do it easily. It will be harder for the ANC. You need a strong leader from the ANC side who can win the ANC in that type of negotiation arrangement, and who will be able to come back to the ANC support base and say, or even members, and say, listen, this negotiation we're having with the DA is going to work to our benefit, but you must explain how it's going to work to the benefit of the ANC members. It's possible also that the resistance may not necessarily come from ANC members in general terms. The resistance may be coming from pockets of vested interest within the party, who may feel threatened by having to work with their ideological nemesis, who we don't know how they will behave when they're within the state.
Yes,
because
well, exactly, because the state has become the feeding trough for many of these networks.
Yeah, so
and if we go into a direction where, for example, which is an idea that's being floated here at the National Results Centre, is if the ANC keeps control of the executive, and the DA takes charge of the legislature, where it's a super accountability model, then there will be enormous scrutiny of ANC cadres and ministers and employees, which they won't enjoy.
Yeah, I severely doubt whether there would be like support for that sort of notion in the ANC. Like,
it would not work, Peter. You know why? Because you basically be giving the DA filibustering rights and veto rights over executive decision, using the parliamentary authority.
There'll be accountability, but in a deal like that, you're going to have to give the executive, the party that retains control of the executive, something like the support for the budget. Unqualified support for the budget.
But could you just imagine the parliamentary debate where MK is the de facto opposition party, the primary opposition party in the House? Because you'd have like the DA ANC coalition basically voting as a bloc, right?
Yes.
And you have MK on the other side being the primary opposition.
And then an ANC budget that probably pushes through something that the DA fundamentally disagree with, but they're going to have to support it because this is part of the deal.
Anyway.
I mean, so there are terrible choices and worse choices.
All government decisions have to be thoroughly negotiated in that situation. I'm also thinking about what if they go via the GNU, Government of National Unity criteria. The interim constitution back then stipulated the coalition arrangement was actually legislated and authorized by the constitution. So I think the minimum was if you have 10% of the vote, you could participate in the national executive if you choose to. So imagine
that's a non-starter because MK is being projected to 14.
Yes.
So I'm saying, imagine they come up with a criteria. They say, okay, we don't care whether you're MK or EFF. So starting point is that any party that has got 10% of the vote, you are welcome to come to the national executive. Each 10% is worth one seat in the national executive of the government.
Davi's laughing.
I'm just thinking.
I know.
But then you might have a situation where you've got a Minister of Education to do Zelia Zuma. I mean,
can I just, because what you've just said, like this discussion is not just a national discussion, it's also a Gauteng discussion,
and
it's also a KZN discussion, and it seems marginally also a Northern Cape discussion. Right?
It might even go to the metros.
Exactly, plus in the metros. So it's a much more complex discussion.
So let's talk about KwaZulu-Natal quick. I mean, do you want to run through the numbers quick?
Sure.
Because that's enormously complex arrangements.
So for those that haven't seen the projection, so the KZN projection now is the MK is the largest party on 44% of the vote.
From zero.
So they've gone from 0 to 44%, right? Then basically tied for second place is the ANC on 18%, right? 1-8. They've lost 36% of the vote. Also on 18% is the IFP, okay? I think they went up by 2 percentage points or so. Then there's the DA, 14%.
Takes them to 50 flat.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. We'll get to that in a moment. So the DA is 14 flat, and also flat from the last election, right? So it's stayed at 14%. And the EFF, 2%, down from 10. So just one thing before we continue. The EFF lost 80% of their vote in KZN. It's unbelievable. So I mean, also what happens to the ANC is also unbelievable.
Sorry, we haven't yet spoken about the EFF in any depth. That still needs to happen as well. But sorry.
So that's the projected outcome, right? And then if you just think about it logically, right, therefore, there's really only 4 options in KZN. There's 4 things that can happen. Okay. Thing number 1 is MK plus ANC. Okay.
That's 44 plus 18.
Plus 18, 62. Okay. MK plus IFP, also 62.
Yes.
MK plus DA, right, theoretically, which is 14 plus 44 is 58, right? Or everyone but MK and EFF. And that, if the projection holds, right, and just for the viewers, there's a margin of error, like maybe a point up and down for each party. But right now, the projection is IFP 18, DA 14, 14, and ANC 18. So 18 plus 18 is 36, plus 14 is 50. That's on the dot, right, if the projection holds. So there's the potential for an ANC IFP DA coalition.
Okay.
But, I mean, so it'll be 3 coalition parties, 2 parties that are 18% parties, and 1 party that's a 14% party. Even just putting that one together is going to be interesting.
Do you see, I mean, MK is the biggest party in KZN. Do you see any of those parties working with MK to form a majority government?
It will be difficult for the IFP to work with MK. The IFP would more likely, in my view, be interested in working with the ANC and or DA. We don't know how the other small parties will do. If any of the small parties maybe can sneak in 1% or...
Yeah, but I don't think in the math it's just not relevant.
Yeah.
So there's no scenario that gets you to 49 unless these projections now shift a little bit and the ANC, DA, IFP gets them to 48 or 49. Then all of a sudden the EFF's 2% or maybe Action SA 0.5% actually becomes relevant. But the way it looks now is that really it's just about those parties. There's no scenario that gets you to 49 or 48.
I mean, but Peter, KZN is a big issue because KZN is actually the strongest negotiating entry point for MK party in their dealings with the ANC.
Yes.
Yeah, precisely.
And my view is that in their dealings with the ANC, they will want to have a package agreement. They will whatever the demands to the ANC, they're going to play. But the ANC might also have a different approach in wanting to talk to them. So, and there might also be a possibility that we don't want to deal with you. We will rather exhaust other options. You are the last resort. But I think the ANC there won't be unanimity in the ANC. There may be people in the ANC who will say, let's swallow our pride. Let's talk to these guys. Remember, they said that they're ANC. The leader says it's ANC. So let's talk to them. Let's swallow our pride. Let's negotiate. But that would mean the ANC having to compromise a lot of things which they thought they were clearing up on Zuma. And what about the rest of the population that don't want Zuma?
That, exactly.
And the same population which drove them away from the ANC as a result of the Zuma effect.
And remember, Zuma will be in court next March for his corruption trial. I mean, so that complicates things on that front even further.
Yes.
And I want to pose the question to both of you: if you manage to cobble together a coalition between those 3 parties, it takes you to 50 plus 1 single vote to get them across the line. Does that government then have legitimacy, that provincial government, if you've got a 44% party out in the cold then?
No, it does, Peter. That's why even in the National Assembly, theoretically, all the opposition parties can get up and bench the ANC.
Yes. But does that not affect the legitimacy of this cobble?
No, it doesn't, because it's a proportional system. So what it means is that the majority of voters combined are represented by this huge block of variety of parties. And this other huge block, which happens to be 40%, is being benched.
I fully agree. And I also think we've sort of reached a point of
you guys are ganging up against me now.
Yeah, exactly. much like the opposition parties will shortly do on the ANC. Okay, I'm joking. No, look, I think we've also reached like a point of brutal practicality in South African politics, and this is also a little bit about why the base stuck with the DA.
But that might be a good thing.
People are like, the power's out, the water's out every now and then. There's a hell of a lot of crime all over. There's giant unemployment. I don't really care. I don't really care about legitimacy. You get to 50%, you can pass problems, you can solve my problems. That's fine. So I think we're getting to that point of brutal practicality, and so I completely agree with him.
As a side note about brutal practicality, was brutal practicality the reason for the tiny parties now, their non-performance? That they did get a lot of publicity before the election. There was a lot of excitement about the new smaller parties, Rise Mzansi, Bossa, Action SA. Was brutal practicality the reason why they collectively scored less than 2% of the electorate?
There's a lot, just long conversation. But I think the first point is the fact that there were 3 parties. And let's just talk about the Rise, Bosa, Action SA situation, right?
Yes.
The fact that there were 3 parties, I think, was a massive problem for those parties, but also in the minds of the voters, right? Because it just... you're three parties with roughly the same platform and roughly the same space, trying to achieve roughly the same thing. Why don't you have the maturity to work together? Is question number one. What happens to Bosa when Musi Maimane is no longer there? What happens to Rise Mzansi when Songezo is no longer there?
Yeah.
Right? Like, people are looking for a serious alternative, right? And when you start out of the block like that, it just doesn't feel great. So I think the fragmentation was a huge problem for them, for their legitimacy and seriousness. So they got 1% for Action SA, 0.4 for Bosa, 0.4 for Rise. That's 1.8. I guarantee you, if it was one party, it would have gotten more than 1.8. Like the sum would have been more than the parts here, because of that credibility. I think that's the first thing. It's just. And I think that killed them right out of the gate, to be honest. Their inability to form a kind of cohesive, true alternative, right? That's point one.
Even more, to your point.
Yeah.
Imagine them all of them being in the DA, for example.
That's different, exactly. And that's an even much bigger, different discussion.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's going to be a discussion that I'm sure is being back-channeled at some point.
To bring them into the fold.
Sure. I mean, that's just the rational thing to do. But okay, that's the thing. But that's point one of the failure, right? I think point two of the failure is also just like, they were relatively well resourced, but they were not nearly as well resourced as the other large parties. So like that, the smaller campaigns, right?
And money would have made a difference.
Yeah, and also they just. I was not particularly impressed with Action SA's campaign or Maimane's campaign. Maimane's campaign was okay, I guess, but Action SA didn't really have a proper message in this campaign. I was actually quite impressed intellectually by Rise's campaign.
Yes.
Like, I thought they had a great message. They were very clear. They did the basics right. They had got good ads. They had lots of postering. So Gezo did well in all of these events he went to.
Yeah.
But they, I mean, there's also just some basic gravity in South African politics, right? Like, you need name recognition.
Yes.
There's a certain percentage of the people who even know about you who will like you. Only a certain percentage of the people who like you will vote for you or consider voting for you. Only some of them will convert. Only some of them will turn out. So the pool gets very small very quickly if only 15% of people know who you are. So starting a party like 6 months before the election, it just, anyway. So that was problem number two. And then like the final point I was going to make escapes me now. So continue.
Pumi, your assessment of the smaller parties, lots of excitement beforehand, obviously didn't perform as expected.
Yeah, I won't let you go without me saying something about what he calls brutal practicality.
Yes.
That was the third point. Sorry, let me just finish my point. And yes, then it is this
Keep
thing about just, geez, we are facing a situation where something like the July riots from the other year could happen in our country. We are facing a situation where, like, load shedding hopefully is done, but may or may not be done, or maybe actually a massive problem. Same with water. Same with lots of basic infrastructural stuff. We're also facing a situation where, like, people are openly questioning the nature of our constitution, right? Like, Iluva, but also Zuma was talking about parliamentary supremacy, like, in the lead up to this election. So there are really foundational questions, and I think a lot of voters were just like, geez, I just better play it safe.
Which means that Rescue SA probably worked in the end.
Yeah, but, and we're the big party that can take these guys to court. That will just fight tooth and nail. That will, and we've got this track record, and we've got way more posters than everyone else. And there's three kind of like, it's a bit of a mess over there, right? All of that together, it just didn't work.
Pumi?
No, on brutal practicality, I just want to remind you, Peter, that it happened in Johannesburg, where the ANC has got most votes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that coalition government that was led by DA and Popalatswe, it was a brutal practicality arrangement where they benched the ANC, and as opposition parties they collaborated until the ANC was able to convince the other parties to back them. I think even in Tswana now, brutal practicality is at play in the coalition government led by the DA. Because the ANC has got most votes in Tswana, but there's a stable coalition because of the brutal practicality of Action SA, DA, ACDP, Freedom Front Plus, in Tswana, under serious brink. It's happening. So brutal practicality can also happen in KwaZulu-Natal, but in this case, it's dependent on whether there can be that 1% margin that can tilt the scale, Davi, for the three parties to have 50+1. But there's another second condition of what happens at the national level, because there will be that linkage.
Absolutely.
So brutal practicality in this case is conditional to what happens at the national level.
It's about the package deal, like you said.
And there are larger items on the negotiation table, right? But he just raised something that I want to address, which is really important, which is, and let me now take the perspective of someone, let's say, which I am in my personal perspective, like someone who is broadly liberal with a market perspective on how economics should be run, and law
individual
and
rights.
So exactly, right. Let's assume the perspective of
constitutional
that sort of
supremacy, rule of law, so on and so forth.
So let's assume the perspective of such a person, right? Which is my perspective personally. Anyway, you want a party that can get as much as possible behind those values, right? And as things start to fragment in South Africa politically, as it is, right, it would be very good for you if such a party gets 30 or 35% of the vote, right? So that when we're sitting at this table in 2029, and who knows what that situation is going to be. The discussion is about...
We'll be here.
We'll be here, and we'll say, okay, what is the combination to get to 50? And it would be just fantastic. It would be fantastic for all of us who believe in this perspective of the world. If the start of the discussion is, there's a building block of 35, not a building block of 22, right? It's just very basic mathematics, okay? And the question is, how do we get from the 22 block that we have today to the 35 block that we need to actually fix the problems in the country, right? And can the DA get there in its current setup, with its current branding, with its current policy positions, with its current approach to politics?
No.
I have personally kind of argued for no over a long period of time.
Yeah.
I think the DA will say this election was a huge success because they suppressed the people who stood up and said we could be the alternative, and they would be right.
And who really launched a significant assault on their voting base.
With that argument, right? With that exact argument,
Yes.
like, you guys will never be the big party. I think Rise even put an ad out that said that.
Yes.
You guys will never be the big party that will take down the ANC. Vote for us. It failed, right? So now the DA is the standard bearer, okay? But the question is, what does the standard bearer need to do to try to get more, right? And just this whole thing was triggered for me with something you said, which is the obvious first step, right? Is just get all of the family members back into the house. Action SA, Rise, BOSA should not be existing outside of the DA.
That should be an important project for them off the bat.
That's a very obvious start, low-hanging fruit, and that's just scratching the surface, right?
But that project, Peter, if it were to happen, would succeed depending on whether you are bringing them back to kill them because you don't want them to exist, or you are bringing them because you want to broaden your base.
Yeah, but the second one.
You have to choose which one you want. If you are bringing them to kill them, then they will disappear, but you will remain the same old DA. That is not going anywhere.
So if you bring their base on board, necessarily you will have to amend your policies to make, or if there are major policy differences, to try and
we should also just be clear, right? You're talking about 1.8% on top of a 22% party. So it's also bizarre to go to the DA and say, please rewrite your policy platform so that we can get to 0.4%.
Otherwise, you're going to have to kill them, Darby.
But it's not really about killing them. It's about the transforming the brand DNA of the thing that today we call Democratic Alliance to be acceptable to say, or a voting option to 50% of the country. Because if you've got the possibility of 50, maybe you convert 40, maybe 35 turn out,
This
right?
feels like we're having a conversation in 2014. Because this is a conversation that we had in 2014.
Well,
it feels like we're a decade
It's hilarious that
behind.
you're saying that because...
But that's an indictment for the DA,
No,
Peter.
but it's hilarious that you're saying that because the DA got 22.2% in 2014, they got
here we are.
21.8% 10 years later, right?
Yes.
And that's exactly why we're having this discussion.
And this process started in 2014, you'd argue, but then stalled in the decade since.
Yeah.
Or even regressed.
Yeah, regressed.
How do they move then? I mean, surely you've got, and we've said this for how many times, but they've got a base from which to move from. What do they do?
I think they allowed Cyril Ramaphosa, when he came into power, to destabilize their plans, their original plans, because there was this whole sensitivity around Cyril. His coming into play has saved the country from collapse. And then there was this sensitivity that, if you go hard on Ramaphosa, then you're going to have a problem whereby the RET faction of the ANC kicks him out, and you are back to the age. And people were scared of that era that was basically ravaging the country. Yeah. And I think the DA, instead of saying, well, our voting base was sort of destabilized by the fact that there was this new leader, fresh leader, with a whole hope. So our decline in that election should be forgiven because there was that kind of... so the DA acted on that, and it destabilized its own plans.
Okay,
and then what happened to the Ramaphosa factor? And now the DA, I'm sure, wishes they didn't tamper with their strategy. They should have hung on to their strategy. And I am sure now we'll be talking about different ball game.
Sorry, now I'm really scratching into the sensitive areas here, but like,
no one's watching. It's just us. Let's chat.
So I just think that a lot of people will think back and say, it's a real pity that Maimane was the standard bearer for that strategy.
Yeah.
Because it could have gone other ways, right? And I think that is something that a lot of people will reflect on. And but now it's 10 years later and we've pressed the refresh button, right? So if this is even their perspective, we don't know. But if it's even their perspective, I think at least there's been this 10-year period of hard lessons learned that can be applied to whatever the future trajectory is, right? And I really hope that will be the case.
It does feel like almost a second chance for them.
Yes.
That they've been given now.
It is, Peter. They did a review after 2019 election. They now must do an in-depth review in this election.
You're right.
And that review must not just be about internal party politics and whether the messages landed nicely, whether this leader was articulating properly.
That's a very good point.
It must be a nationwide in-depth review of the DA introspection. And then say, how can we get to... They must not say, how can we stay in the opposition? How can we keep the Western Cape? No. The ANC has fallen below 50%, Peter. The DA should be saying, how can we get to 50%? That should be the discussion.
And that decline of the ANC, I'd argue, is going to accelerate from here.
Well, the ANC, there's no history, unfortunately, for the ANC, sadly. There is no precedent in the ANC where the ANC loses something and it regains it.
Look what happened in the Western
I don't
Cape.
think it has happened.
I think we should be careful because there was also no precedent of the ANC losing 36% in a province until yesterday, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So I think the electorate is fluid, more fluid. The electorate, things are loose, and you know, in the UK or in like other democracies, when the Labour gets hammered in this election, we don't always think, oh wow, now Labour could never ever. Next election, Labour will try again, right?
But David, there's a reason why the ANC finds it hard to come back, and the reason is simple: that the ANC doesn't have an opposition strategy. And secondly, it doesn't even have a coalition strategy. So in Tshwane and Johannesburg and all these places, they work on an interim basis, on a kind of like survival mode basis to remain in power. Instead of saying, here's our principle, we have a principle. If this principle is not met, we'll stay in the opposition.
And there's nothing like that.
And
there's no framework.
Make our voters miss us so that we can come back. So there's this thing of wanting to stay in power, even when staying in power can harm you even more going forward.
But necessity is the mother of invention, right? So they need to figure that out now. And you're right, if they don't, then they'll be gone, right? If they cannot function, for example, they'll have 18% now in the legislature in KZN. Maybe they'll take their 18% into a coalition government and they need to figure out how to make that function well, right? Maybe they'll take their 18% onto the opposition benches in the KZN government, right? They need to figure out how to do that well. If they don't, they'll die. Like we're getting into the sort of basic evolutionary process of democracy, right? Which is great.
But like Mpumi says, there's no precedent for that. There's no history in the ANC in the recent past that they've been able to do that. Look at what happened in the Western Cape. They've pretty much been wiped out there, haven't they?
But the argument I will make is that the Western Cape, they were always extremely weakened. They were never particularly stronger than the Western Cape. Their bench was never deep in the Western Cape. I think the Western Cape
might be different somewhere else.
It might be a little bit different where they have a deep bench.
Yes.
Where they have kind of demographic appeal where they can easily get back into it if they do things well, right? So,
and Gauteng, for example,
but
should
that
be
must
a
be
province
backed by a clear strategy.
Of course.
And then you can make voters think, okay, we can reconsider here.
Exactly.
But then there needs to be performance, commensurate performance on the opposition benches to hold the government of the day accountable. Davi, can we run through the latest national to national numbers?
Sure.
And also, I mean, on your latest
Gauteng?
No. Your latest national projection numbers, national to national, the ANC have weakened.
Yes.
Where did they drop from to what number and why?
Yes, so I think yesterday morning we projected the ANC to be on 42.3% nationally.
Yes.
And this is just on the national ballot, not the regional ballot, okay? This morning we reran the model again. It put them on 41.3. Okay?
So they've lost a percentage.
So 1 full percentage point lower. I think the difference is it's highly related to what's happening in KZN. The MK numbers were projected to be very heavy, which is why they were on 42.3, but it's coming even a little heavier. right? And it's also reflected, we didn't communicate it, but it's also reflected in what we've seen in our KZN model. So we projected internally, without announcing it, very early on yesterday morning.
Yes.
In the KZN model, it looked to us like 42% for MK right from the beginning. In KZN, now we're talking about 44, right? So they're higher there. Same thing in Mpumalanga. So in Mpumalanga, I think, I can't recall what we projected MK, but we projected KZN, the ANC in Mpumalanga, originally at 52.
Yes.
It came down to 51.5 because MK came in a little bit heavier. So like that southern Mpumalanga, KZN, we always thought it was going to be big for MK. It's even a little bit bigger, which is why it's taking them down.
And it's getting worse for the ANC.
And there's one more thing to say. This is for the national ballot only, which is theoretically only half of parliament, right? There's the other half, which is regional. That half, we need to run the computations again. When we did this kind of last evening, it looks like the regional ballot is coming in like half a percentage point or so less for the ANC than the national ballot. So we're talking 41.3 on the national, 40.8 on the regional, settling at 41-ish, right?
The regional panel don't assist the ANC because that's where people also split their votes.
Yes.
A lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, we looked at that precisely last night. There's about 250,000 people who voted ANC on the national ballot, but who voted regional for a different party.
Yeah.
So 250,000 people. It's not huge, but it's enough for an impact. That's roughly 4 or 5 seats in parliament.
Gentlemen, this has been fun. Thanks, Mpumi.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Davi.
Thank you.
We're going to do some more projections, hopefully, and
we'll
run some more models. Mpumi, fun day out at the results center.
Yeah, well, now I'm looking at the faces of the politicians. I've not had time to look at them properly. I saw quite early in the morning coming whistling. And then when you asked him, one journalist was asking him, what's the next forward, what's the next step, and then he was saying, no, I can't talk, I need to go consult my ANC desk, which was contrary to what he had said the previous day when he was just commenting and lashing out at MK party. Today he was more calmer.
Well, let's see whether the reality sets in. Davi Scholes, thank you very much, and Mpumelelo Mkabela, thank you so much, ladies and gents. Thank you for watching. Keep your eye on News 24. We'll be publishing stories and analysis for the rest of the day and for the rest of the next couple of weeks until we elect a new president of the Republic of South Africa. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.